What's up guys, Steel Frodo here, and welcome to my review of the latest smartphone flagship from Apple, the iPhone X. Let's get started. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the iPhone X already. This is the first iPhone to actually take a big departure from the standard home button at the bottom, speakers up top phone that's been around since the first iPhone. And oddly enough, when people see this design, the first question isn't about the design, it's about, is this phone worth that $1,000 price tag? And I actually kind of tend to refer back to the design to answer that question, even though there's so much more that makes it worth that price tag. The design kind of says a lot. It's got this premium look to it that makes it kind of feel like a $1,000 phone to begin with. And don't get me wrong, I've dealt with other glass phones before, like the Samsung phones, but there's just something about that stainless steel band. I mean, even the last iPhone was made entirely out of aluminum, which was pretty premium, but something about that feel of stainless steel made me gravitate more towards the iPhone X. There are things that have carried over from the previous iPhone, the speaker grill on the bottom, the lightning port, and the lack of a headphone jack. But that's where the similarities kind of end. From previously waking up your phone with your fingerprint reader and the home button, you actually tap the screen and use facial recognition, and you get right in. On the back, the dual camera system has been rotated 90 degrees, and both sensors, the telephoto and the wide angle, have been optically stabilized. What this means is that you get better low-light photography from both the wide angle and the zoom lens. This also allows you to zoom up to 6 times in video and 10 times in photo mode. Now, as far as I can tell, the front-facing camera is still the same 7-megapixel camera that we had from the iPhone 7, but it's packed in with a bunch of other sensors that allow it to do things like portrait selfie mode, which isn't the greatest with the type of hair I have. It has trouble tracking, and the stage light mono is just kind of hit or miss. So a lot of the stuff in the selfie camera is still in the beta process, but what I will say is that those two front-facing cameras are not in the beta process. They are some of the best sets of cameras I have ever used on a smartphone. It's mind-blowing. Look at some of these shots that I've taken with the iPhone in the time that I've had it. I barely have to do anything with this camera to get a good shot to come out. This photo here of the parking lot where I work, the lights have been out for weeks now, and I was able to get a good shot in low light with no noise, and I barely had to do anything other than take the phone out and snap a shot. It's pretty incredible. And of course, Apple's relying on those incredible cameras because they're pushing augmented reality. For example, Sky Guide. This is actually a really cool app. You can buy it, point it at the sky, and it'll tell you where all the stars and constellations are, and it's pretty cool. Now, moving back around to the front, one of the first things you'll experience with this phone is Face ID. It's the new way that Apple has you unlock your phone instead of using your fingerprint reader. It's actually pretty good. I was surprised the first time I used it. Of course, me being me, I had to test the extremes, like what if your face is facing it but your eyes aren't? Well, it just waits for your eyes to look at it. It's actually pretty on point. And when I say on point, I mean you can pick this up from most angles and it's going to pick you up. Now, distance can vary. It's pretty good at some pretty far distances, but it does have its limits. Now, granted, you also don't have to pick it up and hold it directly in front of your face, but that works too. But it won't work if it's laying at a very extreme angle, so no waking it up off the table. And, of course, it's not going to work super close. Use some common sense, and it's probably going to work for you 99% of the time. And all of this is being powered by what Apple's calling their True Depth sensor. The whole top notch with the True Depth camera allows for some pretty innovative facial recognition. I would say probably the best in the industry. But with Apple being Apple, there's always a gimmick. And that gimmick this time around is animojis. Yep, the animated emojis that I've seen every reviewer make a funny face with, and every millennial make the same joke with. And that joke is, what does the fox say? That's the one. Now, I said earlier that the first question I'm asked when people see this phone is it worth the $1,000 price tag? Still not answering that yet, but the other question is, does that notch get in the way when you use it? Honestly, I stopped noticing the notch before the end of the first day owning the phone. I set a really dark background, so thanks to the inky blacks of that OLED panel they used, it kind of just vanishes on the home screen, and unless you're forcibly staring at the top of the screen, like what I'm kind of forcing you to do here, The only things up there are the time and the battery status, so it doesn't matter. But Apple was very clever with that status area, and it will actually change based on things that go on the phone. Like when you connect headphones, for example, you see a headphone notice pop up. It's kind of cool. And when you start charging the phone, the battery gets bigger and you can see that it's charging. Again, kind of clever. And on the topic of charging, finally, gone is that solid metal back that impeded us from what we always wanted, and in comes the glass back of the iPhone to enable, yes, something that's been on Android for quite a while, but to refer to Marques Brownlee from MKBHD,
clearly not first, but still nice. It doesn't have to be first to be nice.
Yes, it's wireless charging. It's taken long enough, but it's finally here, and I am very glad to see it. And even though I'm an Apple fan, I did actually opt for the Samsung charger just because I love that pivot that you get out of it. Prop up, lay it flat, whatever works. I love it. Now, I've glossed over this long enough, and this is the biggest part of the phone, literally the biggest part of the phone. It's the display. It's the biggest display Apple's ever put on an iPhone, and in fact, it's one of the best. I would say the best display they've ever put on an iPhone, despite the weird 1125p resolution. It's an OLED panel, first OLED panel on an iPhone, and it is amazing. I tend to set dark wallpapers solely for the purpose of using the inky blacks that you get out of that OLED panel. And while the home button's gone, they implemented gestures well enough that you kind of just stop noticing after a while. Control center is the only thing I'm still kind of getting used to, even though it's pretty easy to get to it from the corner. It's nice, and everything is kind of where you'd expect it to be, so it's not like it's the end of the world with the lack of a home button. In fact, you're getting a better experience overall with this display. And in case you don't believe me, here's the iPhone 7 Plus right next to the iPhone 10, and I know it's kind of hard to portray through video, but believe me, it's a very noticeable difference. You can tell that that OLED panel they're using on that 10 is HDR compliant. You can see colors in it that you really just can't see out of a standard LCD panel like what they're using on the iPhone 7 Plus. And while you can kind of go edge to edge with the video, you can see it cuts off top and bottom, and the notch becomes very apparent. But overall, the actual experience of this video on an HDR display, I've never had this on a phone before, so for me, it's incredible. Take that for what it is. And yes, I know that AMOLED panels are way more saturated, like what they put in the Samsung phones, but I honestly like the color accuracy. And, you know, that may be just my preference, but I'm sure other people feel that way too. So for those people who like accuracy over, you know, reds that look like the screen's on fire, this might be the display for you. Now, I've gone this entire time, which has been really hard for me, not talking about performance. And overall, how does it perform? It's pretty freaking quick. In fact, it's the fastest phone I've ever used. I work at Best Buy, so I work with a lot of phones on a daily basis, and this thing is quick. Quick enough that that A11 Bionic chip quickly puts the iPhone 7's A10 Fusion chip in its place, which is below it. Now, there's a lot of other things that I could talk about. I could talk about the 1080p, 240 FPS for slow motion, which is nuts. I could talk about the fact that it can do 4K 60 frames per second, which I can't show. There's so many things I could talk about, but I'm going to just stop skimming over the question and answer it. Is this phone worth $1,000? For me, yeah. The same way that every Apple product has been worth whatever they want to charge for it to a degree, because I'm an Apple fan, which is different from an Apple fanboy. Apple fans buy things that they know they will use, and they keep those things because they have an appreciation for them. I mean, I'm going to hold on to this iPhone 10 because it's the biggest change to an iPhone ever. I have a respect for other phones, don't get me wrong. I have a Motorola. I've worked with phones for years, but there's something about Apple that I like. And that's why, for me, this phone is absolutely worth $1,000, as is every other Apple product I've purchased. Because I keep it, I take care of it, I just like the products. So for those of you who like the products and want to celebrate the 10th year of the iPhone, yeah, the iPhone 10 is absolutely worth $1,000. For those of you who just use it as another phone, go look at a Samsung, or maybe even the iPhone 8. Any of those are great options. But for me, I'm going to stick with the iPhone 10.